2nd, 1941. At dawn, 3 million German soldiers, thousands of tanks, and waves of aircraft surged across the Soviet border. This was Operation Barbarossa, the largest invasion in human history. Hitler promised it would crush the Soviet Union in a matter of weeks. The plan? A lightning war to Moscow, then victory. But what started as a storm of steel turned into a nightmare of mud, snow, and blood. German tanks froze solid, supply lines collapsed, soldiers starved in trenches as winter closed in. By the end, the invincible Wehrmacht was bleeding out on the Eastern Front. So why did Operation Barbarossa fail? The answer is a brutal mix of overconfidence, logistics disasters, Soviet resilience, and the sheer cruelty of nature. This is the story of the campaign that changed the fate of World War II. When Hitler launched Barbarossa, Germany was at its peak. France had fallen in just 6 weeks. Poland, Norway, the Balkans, all crushed. The Wehrmacht seemed unstoppable. Hitler believed the Red Army would collapse like a house of cards, calling the USSR a rotten structure. The plan was bold. 3 massive army groups would sweep east. Army Group North to Leningrad, center to Moscow, south to Ukraine. The goal: destroy the Red Army west of the Dnieper River in a few months. Hitler famously said, "Kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will come crashing down." But this overconfidence blinded Germany to reality. The Soviet Union was not Poland or France. It was an empire of vast distances, brutal climates, and endless manpower. What Hitler saw as a quick strike would become a war of attrition. One Germany could never win. Early on, it looked like Hitler was right. In the first weeks, the Wehrmacht advanced faster than ever before. Panzer spearheads smashed Soviet border defenses, encircling entire armies. At Bialystok and Minsk, over 300,000 Soviet troops were captured. By September, Kiev fell, and over 600,000 Soviet soldiers were prisoners of war. German soldiers wrote home bragging, "We are unstoppable. Moscow is only weeks away." Even Hitler believed the war was essentially over, but these victories were deceptive. Each battle pushed German forces deeper into a land they barely understood, stretching supply lines to the breaking point. And while millions of Soviets fell, more kept coming. Stalin refused to surrender. He called for a great patriotic war, and factories east of the Urals churned out tanks, planes, and rifles day and night. The Red Army was bloodied, but not broken. Here's where reality hit. Germany's entire strategy relied on speed, blitzkrieg, but speed needs fuel, food, spare parts. The deeper the Germans went, the longer their supply lines stretched. Hundreds of miles of bad roads, weak bridges, and mud tracks. The railroads were a disaster. Soviet tracks used a wider gauge, so German trains couldn't run until tracks were rebuilt. Trucks broke down by the thousands. Horses, yes, horses, pulled most of the supplies. Imagine trying to feed and fuel 3 million men and 600,000 vehicles when every litre of fuel had to crawl forward on dirt roads. By autumn, frontline units were running on fumes. Some tanks sat idle for days, waiting for fuel. Soldiers rationed bread to 200 grams a day. One German officer wrote, "We advance, but our stomachs stay behind." Blitzkrieg had met the limits of geography. German generals expected Soviet resistance to collapse. Instead, they faced something unexpected: the T-34 tank. When German panzers first encountered it near Smolensk, they were stunned. The T-34 had sloped armor that deflected German shells and wide tracks that glided over mud where German tanks sank. The Wehrmacht realized for the first time that they weren't technologically superior anymore. Worse, Soviet factories, relocated east beyond German bombers, pumped out thousands of these tanks. By the end of 1941, the Red Army fielded thousands of T-34s, while Germany struggled to replace its own losses. And then came Siberian reinforcements. Stalin gambled that Japan wouldn't attack from the east, so he moved entire divisions from Siberia to Moscow. Fresh troops hardened by Arctic cold. They would soon play a decisive role. Then came Rasputitsa, Russia's infamous mud season. When autumn rains fell, roads turned into rivers of sludge. German tanks and trucks bogged down axle deep. Horses collapsed. Soldiers abandoned vehicles and dragged guns by hand. One panzer officer wrote, "Our tanks sink like ships. Movement is agony." The advance slowed to a crawl. Blitzkrieg was dead. And then winter hit. early and savage. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius, -22 degrees Fahrenheit. German troops had no winter gear. Their rifles froze. Oil turned to jelly. Soldiers wrapped feet in newspapers and rags. Frostbite crippled entire divisions. Meanwhile, the Soviets, prepared for the cold, launched a massive counteroffensive in December 1941. Siberian troops, wearing white camouflage, attacked across the frozen front, pushing the exhausted Germans back from Moscow. Hitler's dream of a quick victory shattered in the snow. As if nature wasn't enough, Hitler made fatal decisions. He refused to allow retreats, insisting not a step back. This trapped German armies in hopeless battles. He also split his forces, diverting tanks from Moscow to Ukraine in summer 1941, chasing resources instead of focusing on a single decisive blow. Every delay gave the Soviets time to regroup. By winter, the Red Army was stronger, better supplied, and backed by an industrial machine beyond Germany's reach. Hitler had turned what could have been a campaign into a war of annihilation, and time was on Stalin's side. By spring 1942, Barbarossa was a failure. The Germans had captured millions of prisoners, but the Soviet Union was still standing and growing stronger. The Wehrmacht had lost 750,000 men in 6 months. Entire panzer divisions were down to a handful of tanks. This failure changed everything. Germany was now locked in a two-front war it could never win. Operation Barbarossa didn't just fail, it doomed Hitler's empire. From this moment on, the question was not whether Germany would lose, but when. Now for a minute, imagine this. The endless columns of frozen soldiers dragging themselves through snow, while abandoned tanks rust in the white wilderness. In their diaries, German officers wrote, "We underestimated everything. The distances, the climate, the enemy." Barbarossa had begun with dreams of conquest and ended with the seeds of destruction. So why did Operation Barbarossa fail? Overconfidence, broken logistics, the shock of the T-34, Soviet resilience, and the brutal Russian winter. Hitler thought the war would last 10 weeks. Instead, it lasted 4 years and cost over 20 million Soviet lives and 4 million German casualties. Operation Barbarossa wasn't just a failed invasion, it was the turning point of World War II. This is the story of how Hitler's greatest gamble became his greatest disaster.